Hello, welcome back to another video. Today I'm doing the 25.12 ADC tier list. So, drop content, like, subscribe, and let's get into it. This is the first of the two MSI patches. They wanted to target some of the outliers for the most part, trying to buff up some of the champions which are on the fringe of seeing competitive play, already see some competitive play and have like room to gain. Other than that, there are nerfs to directly some of the best competitive options or the highest prio competitive options, and those are the main things to talk about this patch. So let's get into it. The D tier is going to have one champion in it, and it's Kalista. She got nerfed this patch. I already didn't recommend Kalista. She was already really struggling for average elo brackets, and this kind of just continues that spiral. Kalista's in the worst spot for like any marksman at the moment, and probably any marksman for a while at this point. His champion needs some level of adjustment to kind of reignite her in solo queue. She's really just quite far away from what she should be as a champion. She's too reliant on like support pairings. She's reliant on like early game advantages. She's a very hard ADC to play, and all these things have just led her to be an incredibly competitively skewed marksman. I wouldn't be surprised if she still sees competitive play, but for solo queue, she is my like number one avoid champion. I just don't think she's worth playing. Maybe you can get away with it if you're like playing with someone you know and you're very comfortable with champion, but even then, I think there are just substantially better options, which are just easier to pilot and have like more flexibility in what they can do. Moving on to the C tier then, a lot of the C tier has actually been cleared out. A lot of them did get buffed in this patch as they were underperforming for solo queue. Brand remains a C tier option. He's obviously not really supported in the bot lane role, and he does underperform outside of very specific pairings, which is why I don't really rate him that highly. I think if Brand got buffed, it would definitely help him across the board and make his increase his placement. But for now, I just don't really recommend him when there are other better, more performant AP options, unless you are pairing him with something like the Nami. You're very comfortable on the champion. Draven, I think if you're very good at piloting him, can still have value. He is a very hard-hitting, hard-to-pilot pick. If you don't pilot him well or you don't play him, he's just not really worth learning at the moment. I just think there are more accessible and easier to play options. He doesn't really work that well in average elo brackets because he is an early game skewed marksman, and traditionally the games go on longer duration in the mid to lower elo bracket kind of range, and he just doesn't really thrive in that environment. Kaiser sits within the C tier. She's currently the most popular marksman in the game because of the Hall of Legends skin. I believe even outside of the Hall of Legends skin, she's still like one of the top like 3 marksmen. Usually she is very popular. She isn't that performant. Like, she's definitely one of her lesser performance states. Obviously some of that comes from like new people picking up the champion, or people not really understanding what kind of builds or like the build flexibility on this pick, as she does have some of the most build diversity of like any ADC pick at the moment. It's not just outright the most build diversity. Don't really recommend her. I think she's a bit harder to pilot, a bit more conditional on supports, and if you play on a server like EU West or NA for example, you understand just how many enchanters you run into. If you pick the spots right for her, though, she definitely goes up the tier list. I just think she's a bit more conditional and a bit harder to pilot than some of the other options, which I recommend over her. Mel. So I originally had Mel like written down for like a C tier champion. I'm going to put Mel in the B tier, purely on the basis that I really like, for like the people who watch these videos, I really encourage people to max E on Mel. Mel is by far and away a better champion if you max E. She actually probably goes all the way up to the A tier. That's just how sizable the difference between Q max and E max Mel is at the moment. So definitely really do encourage that like kind of optimization on the champion. A lot of people don't do it at the moment, which is why this champion, like her actual power, like the actual power of the champion and like the current kind of like solo queue power are quite far apart. Like I think people just misunderstand and don't optimize Mel in the correct way. So yeah, there's something to be gained there. I do think this champion in the right spot so can also be very good. The W is a very powerful ability if you utilize it in a counter pick matchup, something like an Ashe maybe, where you can reflect her arrow and that can like shift fights massively. Dropping down, I'm actually going to drop 2 champions down. So I'm going to drop Ezreal, who I don't think he's bad. I just think he's a bit harder to pilot than some of the other options above him. He traditionally you need to be very comfortable on him. Like, you need to have a very good understanding of how to pilot the pick. And I just think there are other options than him, which have either been buffed more recently or are just easier to pick up, and just drops his placement down. Like I said, I don't think there are any really bad marksmen outside of Kalista. I think Kalista is just outright like the worst marksman in the game, and then after that it's just subjective and it comes down to what you're very comfortable with. But the C tier, like a lot of them, either traditionally more elite skewed, or they are just a bit harder to pilot. I think Ezreal just falls into that bracket at the moment, so I don't really recommend him over some of the other options in the tiers above. And then Corki. Corki hasn't really stuck for average brackets. He's really fallen off in popularity. I believe he is just outright the least he's other than Kalista, he is the second least popular marksman in the game. Even the likes of Kog'Maw has almost like 10,000 plus games like over him in gold plus, which is sizable because Kog'Maw is also a very unpopular marksman. It's unfortunate to see. Corki doesn't perform as well in lower brackets. He's an early lane skewed like bully. He's not hard to pilot. Like I think this champion's actually one of the easier to pilot like early game marksman, which is very nice to have. But his numbers just aren't quite there for like the average Elo brackets. He'll get outscaled by like 90% of the rest of the marksman roster, and yeah, that is meaningful. So it's a pick I don't really recommend as much, albeit it is an easier early game aggression marksman. So there is some level of like valid reason to pick him. Like I don't think he's like out of the picture. I just recommend some of the other options over him in their current state. Might wraps up the C tier. So the B tier then is going to be some of the majors to lead us off. Ziggs sits towards the lower end of the B tier. He's not, as a champion, he's just not that performant at the moment in both mid and bot lane. I have him in the D tier and mid lane. I just don't really recommend him at all there. I just think there are better artillery options. The bot lane, there is merit to playing a champion like Ziggs, which is why I have him a bit higher. He's a low beta option though. I recommend other mage options which are a bit more specialized in this role if you're picking them. Otherwise, traditionally just picking a marksman oftentimes will also just be the way you want to play the game. Veigar sits within the B tier. Also, not absurdly performant, but it's just better in this Elo bracket. Like, this is the Elo bracket where Veigar already thrives as a champion, which makes him a bit more recommendable. If this was elite, he probably sits more like a low C, maybe even D tier option. He's just not really that good for climbing higher up into the ranks. But, like, for this bracket, he is a solid mage option. The other mage is Lux. Lux sits within the B tier purely on the basis of having... it's like Zyra. Lux and Zyra are actually both very, very NA skewed bot laners, I believe. Especially Zyra. Like, if you've ever looked at the data, I'm pretty sure once you hit, like, Master Plus, like, Zyra bot lane's, like, more popular than Zyra support and jungle. I think that was what I saw. Which is, like, shocking, because that is, like, non-existent in other regions. So, yeah, NA really likes Zyra ADC. Lux, on the other hand, is played a bit more. Just generalistically, I think Lux is just a more popular champion for that matter. I think the pick isn't bad. Like, I think she has spots where she can be really good. She needs a lot of gold. She's pretty orientated on just bursting the target. And yeah, her ult's a very powerful ability if you use it kind of off CD to either clear waves, look for those burst opportunities. There's merit. I don't think she's one of the best mage options, but yeah, she's a solid one, and she's definitely there if you want to opt into her. Aphelios moves up to the B tier. You can make an argument that he actually should be an A tier champion, and I wouldn't have a great defense on why I think he's a B tier over A tier, because I like Aphelios. I think as the champion, if you put the time into him, he's very rewarding. He does a huge amount of damage. He's a great hyper carry. The punishment is that he's hard to play. Like, he's a very unique marksman, and that is a learning curve you have to get over. But if you're willing to sink a lot of time to him, I really do recommend him as a champion. I think he's a great pick to just have within your pool. And if you find the right spots to play Aphelios, then yeah, definitely go for it. Definitely look for those, as he can be very rewarding. Don't first summon in solo queue. That's the main thing. He's hard to play, but like if you put time into him, he's definitely in a spot where he's very rewarding for that mastery. Xayah, specifically in counter-pick scenarios, can be really good. Outside of counter-pick scenarios, she's not great, which is why I just don't really recommend her as an A2 option. If you use her as a counter-pick, though, I think this champion can also have great value, like insane value even, like into dive compositions where your ultimate and your self-peeling tools are very, very self-sufficient and valuable. But yeah, it's the main reason you want to be playing a champion like this. Caitlyn remains as a B2 option. She got nerfed a couple times, I believe, towards the beginning of the season, and it definitely affected her. She's kind of just been lingering as like a middle-of-the-pack marksman for a while. You do have to abuse the 650 range she has early on into the game, otherwise she'll feel a bit lackluster compared to other marksman options. She does scale these days, like Caitlyn's scaling and like her one-shot headshots towards the latter parts of the game can be very oppressive. But you need to get more than that out of a champion at the moment. I don't think relying on her late game scaling is enough to kind of take you through, and for that I also have her in the B tier at the moment. Can be very valuable if you like effectively use her range early on into the game. Varus sits towards the low end of the B tier. Losing free armor is meaningful, like for any marksman for the matter. This champion is just going to die more often in lane, and for a champion like Varus, that will hurt him. The main thing about Varus is the fact that he is elite skewed. Like, I saw a comment on my last video, which was like talking about like, oh, why do you Varus, Ezreal, and Kaiser so low? Lots of these marks, well, I mean, in the case of most of these marksmen, they are just harder to pilot and more elite skewed champions. They either need some level of setup or a bit more dependent on compositions. I think Varus, albeit has the ultimate, he needs the setup for lethality, and lethality just ends up being a bit worse off in solo queue, albeit it is still his stronger build. So the build which you want to go more often requires traditionally like better situations within the game, and allowing people to kind of just let you sit back, fire out some arrows, and then play the fight a bit slower. That control just isn't as consistent, and obviously Varus is going to be punished for that. On hit, just not as good at the moment. I think Bork is just not in a good spot in its current state. If they buffed Bork, I think like so Kog'Maw and your Varuses would definitely benefit from that. Right now, but yeah, I'd say he sits more like the mid B tier. He still has the build flexibility. I still don't think the champion's bad. I think in Elite he's still very good, and he will still for sure see competitive play. He's just not as great for average elo brackets at the moment, and yeah, that cements him as like a mid to low end B tier champion. Moving up to the A tier then, we lead off with Samira, who received a very nice buff this patch. Movement speed on the passive, combined with 5 flat damage on the Q. Really big for a champion like Samira. Allows her to more consistently snowball, chase down her targets. She did also benefit from the changes in the previous patch with like trying to push her more towards Bloodthirster. I think if you want to play Samira, she's in legitimately a good spot now, and yeah, very deserving of an A tier. She's hard to pilot though. She's an elite skewed early game snowboarding reliant marksman. She's pretty akin to Draven in that manner. She's just better than Draven in his current state. I think Draven has definitely suffered from nerfs, and Samira has more recently been buffed, and yeah, really benefited from those buffs. Other champions within the A tier, there is a lot of them. The likes of Seraphine is a very good jack of all trades mage. Okay, very good, maybe not. She's a good jack of all trades mage. She has definitely suffered over like just the more recent time where other champions around her have just been buffed, and she's just not that like as consistent as an option. That shows in like pick rate as well. Like, she is a pretty low popularity bot laner at the moment, and for that you could probably argue that she should actually just be towards the high end of the B tier, which I might actually put her. I'll put her at the high end of the B tier. I think there's more room for like other champions in the A tier now. Twitch and Vayne are very, very mid elo solo queue orientated. I think outside of this elo bracket they definitely suffer as champions, and traditionally like their one tricks were very defensive or like frustrated about their position. I mean, that's like it's very common because they are very heavily one-tricked champions, and to an extent they are just weaker high-elo champions. They are not that performant in that bracket because they are just lower range. They're not really buffed towards like being like functional elite or functional like high-elo champions. So yeah, they definitely suffer in that margin, but I don't think they're bad in this elo bracket. In fact, they are most performant in this elo bracket, and they are going to be picks which I recommend if you are looking for something a bit more, maybe not niche, but like a bit more solo carry-esque within solo queue. Some of your AP options include the likes of Swain and Karthus and Hui. In the case of Karthus, I actually removed him because he's just so unpopular. Still plays really nice with like your Leonas, but yeah, it's hard to support this champion when I just don't really see Karthus bot lane anymore. In the case of Swain, he is a great counterpick champion. Play him into low damage, short range compositions, and I think he performs incredibly well within this role. And in the case of Hui, I think he's a really good just general like mage option. Great wave clear, great stalling potential, great damage, great just and general team fight control. I just think this champion's got a lot of things going for it, and albeit it got nerfed and then buffed back up to not quite the same point he was at before, still think he fits very nicely in here as like a good A tier option. Some of the other A tier picks are like more recently buffed Sivir. The W buff was really nice for her. She is now a lot. I mean, she's just more stronger up until all the way up until level 13, which is really nice for a champion like Sivir. Kog'Maw sits within the A tier. He's a pretty good option. I think people misunderstand Kog'Maw. He's actually really strong early on into the game with that Rage Blade spike and like W up time, like your points in W. This champion really spikes off those. He can still function later on to the game if you play him alongside an Enchanter as like a hyper carry option, but Kog'Maw I think is pretty misunderstood, and I say misunderstood. People have been catching on. Like, people now know that Kog'Maw is a lot better early on into the game, and I mean, that's good to see. I think Kog'Maw does have really good pairings. Things like the Borm, if you play him like against like a melee support, can be really valuable. Yeah, I think he's a deserving A tier option. Ashe and Lucian are actually going to drop towards the lower end of the A tier. They've been changed more recently, and they just haven't been as performant as some of the other A tier options. I will continue monitoring them. I think Lucian's definitely a bit more elite skewed as an option, and Ashe, if you're looking for a bit more utility, can be a really valuable pick. The other A tier options are just a bit more performant than them at the moment, and for that I'm going to have them towards the lower end of the A tier. Smolder, still performant. This champion got nerfed after its like really sizable amount of buffs, and yeah, he's still a decent option. Great scaling champion. He does feel inevitable, which I would want to presume is like their goal with this champion. Like they want sort of to be the stacking, scaling ADC, and he is kind of in that margin at the moment. So pick him in the right situations where you aren't going to really suffer on the end of the game, and I think this pick can be really good. Jhin is a good general marksman, good damage, good utility. Doesn't have the DPS that like a lot of the more traditional marksmen have, but in the right spots, and just as a general marksman, I really like Jhin in his current state. I think he actually scales a lot better than he has done in the past as well with the buffs he received not too long ago. So yeah, recommendable marksman, very solid A tier option. And Senna, I'm actually going to drop down to the A tier. Senna, what was I going to say about Senna? Senna got nerfed this patch. So Senna lost, I believe it was like her soul count over went from 14 or 15 to 10%, which is like a half pullback on the buff they gave her. That being said, though, people have massively refined her build since then. Like, old school Senna builds were like the Yomu's collectors, which just aren't anywhere near as performant as Static Shiv Cleaver as like a pairing at the moment. That being said, though, she doesn't have the build flexibility. Like, the first two items are pretty locked. I mean, you can be a bit more flexible with like Cleaver second, but like Static Shiv does look like her just mandatory first slot, and she's definitely weaker this patch, so I'm going to just drop her towards the high end of the A tier. She doesn't quite have the level of agency and durability. I mean, not that you really want durability as a marksman, but she is very vulnerable. Like, you do kind of want the tools around her to be cracked, otherwise you would definitely suffer as a marksman. The new addition to the S tier is Zeri. Zeri really benefited from her buffs this patch. I think out the gates at MSI, she will be one of the highest prior marksmen. She's definitely doing really well. Her burst is really, really powerful. With like the buffs they give to her ultimate, I believe it was like 25 to 75 flat damage on the ultimate. It might have just been 25 at all ranks, but generally that's like at level 6 is huge burst potential combined with the chain damage on the lightning going up. Don't sleep on Zeri. I think she's in a really good state at the moment. I would really recommend putting time into her. If you're looking for something a bit more unique, both Nyla and Yasuo are in a really good spot at the moment. Yasuo is a great counter pick melee option. Pairs really nicely with knockup comps. You do have to be, like, Nyla and Yasuo, you could argue should be below Zeri in the S tier because they're a bit more compositionally and pairing dependent. But in their, like, pairs, I think they are two of the best picks within the game and very deserving of an S tier spot. I think if you're looking for something with hypercarry potential, Tristana can be really good, a bit more of early game agency, siege potential. I think she's just in a generally really good spot in her current state. MF and Jinx, I still like spearheading the S tier, and honestly, like, this is like the trifecta at the moment. And then Zeri, I think if you put the time into her, can be really valuable. But Jinx, MF, Tristana, a great pool to have in their current state. Jinx has been like near the top of the tier list for a long time now. She's a very performant solo queue champion. Doesn't perform that well in competitive at the moment. She's actually not very highly priored. I think a lot of the lane dominating champions make her struggle. But if we go back to like a hypercarry meta, you'll start seeing like your Zeri's a bit more, your Jinx is a bit more, your Aphelios is a bit more. I think it's definitely something to be aware of, especially with like Varus being nerfed as well, that we might see a pretty genuine big shift going into MSI. MF, good old reliable, like pair her alongside an engaged support, give her a BT, and she's an incredibly hard-hitting, powerful ultimate champion, and I really do recommend just having her within your pool, as she can be really good in the right spot. So those are my thoughts. I recommend your Jinxes, your MFs, your Tristanas. Put some time into Zeri. If you want to play Nyla and Yasuo, I think can be really good in the right spots and like great counter pick options. And that's just a general rounded good pool. But like generally, like a lot of the ADCs at the moment are just really solid if you like either put the time into them, you pick them in the right spots. Like everything from the S tier to the C tier, if you put the time in, really valuable. Avoid Kalista, that's like the main go-to here. Like avoid Kalista, and I wouldn't recommend the C tier, but B tier up, I think in the right spots can all be very valuable champions. So thank you guys for watching. See you in the next one. Goodbye. I can't find the book.